Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today's episode, we're going to do like a solo 101 style type of episode. Um, because in honor of it starting to get warm out, like saying that, and I'm in New Hampshire, and a lot of you are probably like, girl, it's been warm out. But not up here. It's been a long freaking winter up here. Um, but in honor of the heat and the warmth finally being here. But this can absolutely be useful any time of year, no matter where you live. We're going to talk about hydration for runners and endurance athletes, and I want this to kind of be like a base level like episode so that you can take this information and run with it and go apply it right away, and not get too much into the weeds. Because, like, we can get into the weeds with hydration about how the different minerals work, electrolytes, calculations, and that type of thing. But I want to keep it relatively 101 base level just so you can go apply it. So, to kind of get it right into it, hydration status is something that I like me and Erica are constantly working on with clients. It is like such a huge cornerstone of sports nutrition and like health in general, gut health. But especially sports nutrition. So, fueling, especially like before, during, and after your training. And it really is so varied depending on so many different factors like your environment, the conditions you're training in, your age, your individual components like your medical history, your sweat rate, your sweat composition, and then like what environment you're working out in, all of these things, whether or not you're pregnant or breastfeeding, like lots of considerations here. So, to kind of just like cover a good baseline to hopefully help you get an understanding of like what you should be doing and where you fall and what I tend to see the most in practice in terms of like tendencies or mistakes. That's kind of the goal here. So, huge, you know, cornerstone. And people might be like, really? Drinking water is like a huge cornerstone, but like it really is. It's a low-hanging fruit. And your hydration status does also have a lot more to do with than just water. So, when I talk about hydration status from a sports nutrition perspective, especially because again, we're talking to endurance athletes, we are talking about both fluid intake, electrolyte intake, and losses. That's really kind of what we need to cover, because dehydration or just like poor hydration status can really affect your performance, your overall health, and it can happen like pretty quickly, pretty easily. I don't think a lot of people are like restricting their hydration like they would calories or carbohydrates, but there's definitely some fear around like having too much sodium, and resistance a lot of clients have over like carrying things while they're training. So let's get into that. So the hydration issues or dehydration essentially it doesn't just look like, oh, I didn't drink enough water. Now that we know that hydration status is fluid plus electrolytes, which just to name the electrolytes, there's sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphate, and bicarbonate, and also chloride. And the ones we lose the most of in sweat are sodium and chloride, and then potassium, but we don't lose nearly as much potassium as we do sodium and chloride. And the others are really just trace amounts that we lose. You don't necessarily have to worry about like repleting them unless we're talking about, like multi-stage, ultra endurance events that are like, in the desert over the course of, several days or something like that. Um, so different hydration issues that I kind of put under the umbrella of like dehydration or just like poor hydration status are, of course, not consuming enough fluid, not consuming enough electrolytes, especially sodium, not consuming enough fluid and electrolytes together, or just having a general imbalance of fluid to electrolyte intake. So maybe you're like within the reference ranges, but it's not quite right for you. And that can lead to conditions like hyponatremia or hypokalemia, which can be pretty serious and life-threatening if they are not corrected early. So obviously we want to avoid these things. For symptoms, of these hydration issues, it's really tricky because the symptoms can kind of pop up no matter which one of those issues you're dealing with. So, working with a sports dietitian or even a sports medicine physician who's very well informed and knowledgeable about sports nutrition can be super helpful to kind of help you pinpoint what went wrong if you are experiencing or have experienced some of these issues. Because it's like you can kind of have some of these symptoms whether you got too little or too much. And yeah, you kind of want to make sure you're going about fixing that the right way so you don't make it worse. So, symptoms, and this is not an all inclusive list, but it's a pretty long one: dry mouth, headaches, extreme thirst, dark colored urine, or just a general decrease in urination volume, GI issues, stomach sloshing while running. That's huge. The top cause of GI issues in like marathoners, half marathoners, runners that I see, especially longer distance stuff, is dehydration or just poor hydration status, which people don't always put together. They're like, oh, it must have been the gels or the food that I ate. But a lot of the times it's hydration related because you've just got, basically a fluid imbalance causing that sloshing or causing diarrhea or causing like stomach cramps, vomiting, fun stuff. Um, Skin tenting. So if you're listening, this may not be as helpful, but as a visual, if you're watching, you can take someone's like skin between their thumb and their finger, and if you pinch it, like on their hand, like on the top of their hand, if it kind of stays like folded when you let go, that's called skin tenting. That's a sign that your skin's poorly hydrated. It should kind of fall right back down like mine did. My grandmother, who has since passed away, I mean, we used to like do that, and it would just stay there for like 2 minutes because she was chronically dehydrated and running on like 1 cup of coffee a day. Muscle cramps or just poor muscular function, especially under fatigue. And this is controversial. Like, I know there's some, people out there who are like, oh, there's no research, to support that muscle cramps always equals like a hydration issue. And it's true, we don't have a lot of research to support that being a potential cause. And there can be other reasons that muscle cramps happen. A lot of it, again, is very variable depending on the individual. And you kind of want an assessment to understand, like, was this just general fatigue? Like, do we need to load our strength training better? Or were we just like doing too much too soon? But I do see in practice, hydration status affects this profoundly. So I definitely put it on the list. Again, just clinical experience working with hundreds of runners, hearing from thousands of runners. Anecdotally, I should put my own study together, but I definitely see muscle cramping, and just like poor muscular function. Like your calf always blows up at the end of a marathon, even though you've done all the strength training and you've rehabbed it properly. Like if you just have, or if you have like a quad that always bothers you, like I tend to see it in large muscle groups for people. And I see it super often. So that's on the list. Increased heart rate. So as we get dehydrated and potentially overheated, our heart has to work faster to try and keep our body functioning in order to cool itself down. So you're going to see an increase in heart rate, which typically means your perceived exertion is going up. It's harder to maintain the same effort with the same level of effort. That's absolutely can be fueling related, but also hydration related. Because remember, our sweat mechanism is to cool us off. So if we stop sweating, which is another symptom of dehydration, we're not going to be cooling off super well. And that's when things can definitely start to go downhill. I'll get into that more in a second, but I want to get through this list. Poor appetite after exercise or just generally feeling bad, especially after hard exercise, like your long run or your speed workout. I also see increase in GI issues kind of with this after runs that can be hydration related. Poor performance, higher body temp, swollen fingers is a big one. You stop sweating. If you feel cold, that's like a sign you're severely dehydrated usually and about to run into some issues. Fatigue, dizziness, confusion are some other pretty serious signs of dehydration. So obviously we want to avoid these things. Um, Even like we want to basically prevent too much loss. Once we see like 2 to 3% of our body weight lost in sweat during exercise or in any type of conditions, that's when our health starts to be compromised and our performance goes downhill. And that can happen pretty quickly. The average person loses about a liter of sweat per hour, and about 1,000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat per hour. And that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot more than even some of our general sports nutrition guideline minimums recommend. Again, we don't have to replace 100% of losses. That's not necessarily the goal. And we don't want to over replace because then we can run into those kind of fluid imbalance issues. But I do find in practice that people are underestimating their needs, especially during exercise, and that there's a lot of fear around consuming sodium during and after exercise. So I'll address that. So essentially, again, your individual needs for hydration throughout your day, and also just during like actual training, kind of like sports nutrition 101, are going to vary quite a bit. But the ranges I tend to give people are you probably need anywhere from like 8 ounces to like 40 ounces of fluid per hour while you are running, training, cycling, whatever it is, that like ongoing cardio exercise. And you probably need at least 300 milligrams of sodium per hour. That's what ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, which is where I'm certified as a personal trainer. That's what they recommend. But we probably need more than that. I tend to see most of my clients' sweet spot within that like massive range be around like 600 to 800 milligrams of sodium per hour and about like 12 to 20 ounces of fluid per hour. That's where I tend to see a lot of people like recreational athletes fall. And again, some really talented recreational athletes too, like sub-3, marathoners. And we need to understand that elite athletes, like elite marathoners, a lot of the times, one of their huge like genetic advantages that makes them born to do that particular sport that they're able to be a professional athlete in. Again, we've got hard work, but we also have a lot of, predisposition and genetics in these cases. These people tend to be like pretty light sweaters. And that's a huge advantage, right? Because like if you're someone who can go lose like 4 ounces of sweat per hour in a marathon and you're running like a 2-hour marathon, you barely have to do much like with your hydration, right? And that just helps you not have to be cumbersome and take things on course. And it helps make your performance better, essentially. We do have some people who are heavier sweaters, who are elite athletes, but a lot of them tend to be more in the middle to light. So that's important to keep in mind. Most of us, myself included, we're not born to be elite marathoners, okay? Like our genetics maybe make us pretty good at the sport. Like maybe we can, run a certain fast time or just be super consistent over the course of our life. Or maybe not. Like, maybe we're like, I love this sport. I have to try so hard and I'm back of the pack. Like speed is not something that has come easily for me, even though I try my little heart out. Yeah, some people are just heavier sweaters. Like it doesn't mean they can't perform well. It just means they're going to have to put in a lot more effort to prevent those losses. So those are kind of like the ranges, and then like the ranges within the ranges that I tend to see. As far as like throughout the day, endurance athletes tend to need at least 3,000 milligrams of sodium per day, especially if they're training over like 6 hours a week in extreme conditions, if they're like heavy sweaters. I'm going to link a blog post in the show notes here that's going to explain how to calculate your sweat rate. If this is like a fun at-home experiment you want to do, it does involve weighing yourself, which I understand is not for everyone. You can always like involve a family member or a friend to take the numbers and do the math for you, just so you can get the actual sweat rate, which doesn't include your weight. But we basically need like your starting weight and your finishing weight before and after a run in order to do so, which again, you don't need to know if you're having someone else like help you with the math. But super easy experiment. Not foolproof. Like it's going to change again depending on conditions. For females, it might change throughout the menstrual cycle a little bit. We tend to have higher body temperatures and therefore higher hydration needs in our luteal phase. So that 2 weeks leading up to your period, and so on and so forth. So sodium needs are much higher for endurance athletes. Again, even if you're like, but I'm slow, I'm not an athlete, because I just hear that all the time. Yes, you are. You are an athlete. If you're out there exercising with a purpose, with a goal, even if it's not a time goal, again, especially for more than like 5-6 hours per week, you are an athlete. And you probably have higher sodium needs. This can vary a little bit depending on medical needs. But even if someone does have like hypertension or is on like a sodium restricted diet, again, putting on my like medical nutrition therapy, clinical dietitian hat, I'm still going to need that person to be really cognizant of their sodium intake, especially around exercise, to make sure they're getting enough. I've worked with so many different like cardiologists on this and like renal physicians who have helped me help other clients like really have a lot of confidence in supplementing with sodium, because a lot of people are super fearful to do this. I tend to find people underestimate how much sodium they need, both daily and also on the run. And this is because, one, maybe they're just like blissfully ignorant, but two, a lot of the times there's some fear and skepticism around that. Like there's a lot of back and forth on like, the average American doesn't need an electrolyte supplement. We had the New York Times article last year, all this stuff. And I agree with that. Again, as someone who's worked with the general population, yeah, most of them do not need an electrolyte supplement. If you're going to a workout class like 3 days a week and you don't have any medical issues, like you probably don't need an electrolyte supplement. You can be getting all of these electrolytes in your diet, especially if you are like the average American who's consuming a lot of like salty, highly processed foods. But again, a lot of the clients I work with, they're just not doing that. They're not really consuming a lot of salty, like highly processed foods on a daily basis. Their exercise losses are very great. And they tend to be like in that segment of the population that all of like the articles that you see for the general population are like, actually, but like this population does need more sodium, but like you're not them. So don't pay attention to that. I'm saying do pay attention to that. A lot of you are in that population. There's a ton of fear around sodium intake, in my opinion. It's an interesting dichotomy too, because we see products on the market like Element and Liquid IV that I tend to find the average population that's not super active is probably over consuming those high sodium products. But then the endurance population who like actually could benefit from those products is like under consuming them. So kind of interesting there. There's also a misnomer. I've heard it from several clients that like if you are seeing more sweating or more like salt on your skin because you feel like you're hydrating properly, because you're taking extra sodium on your runs, that means you're like doing too much and your body's just like, basically exporting what it's importing. And there's some truth to that, but it doesn't mean you're doing too much. It means you're giving your body what it needs to replete itself. So you're not getting below that 2% loss that we're trying to prevent. And again, your body's, cooling system is to sweat. So if you're able to sweat more and your sweat tends to have more sodium in it because you have higher sodium losses, that's an individual genetic factor that we don't necessarily have a ton of control over, at least not that we know of. If you're able to sweat more, it means you're able to be more efficient at cooling yourself. So that's a good thing. So often if you are hydrating properly, you probably will see a bit more sweat lost. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's probably a good thing. So I tend to see that a lot. I also tend to see a resistance to just carrying fluids in general while people are running. I don't want to carry the handheld. It makes me feel lopsided. It makes my bicep sore. It makes my shoulder sore. It's too much. I don't like it. It's too heavy. I don't want to wear a vest. The vest chafes. The marathon major doesn't allow the vest. I just want to use the aid stations, but then the aid stations are like every 2 to 3 miles at a local race, and they don't always have what they say they're going to have. Like there's a lot of resistance and barriers for people to hydrating properly. What I tend to find is if I challenge people on this enough and I'm like, hey, you signed up to do a marathon. You didn't sign up to do something easy. So buck up, buttercup, and carry the damn handheld or wear the vest or plant the water bottle, plant the loved one on course to help you with hydration. And get over it and do hard things. If I kind of can help like instill that in people, most of my clients within 6 months are like, how did I run without my handheld? How did I run without hydrating properly? I feel so much better. The rest of my days go so much better. I'm not as tired. It's therefore easier to carry the handheld because I'm not as tired. I can get more out of my training. It's going better. I'm recovering better. And they have no problem doing that. And that's how I feel too. I used to be on that train of like, have to be aerodynamic and type A, and everything has to be perfect in order for me to achieve my goals. And that's just not true. That's actually a huge self-limiting belief that we could probably work on if that's how you feel. So know that the hydration, the seconds it takes to take the water cup at the aid station, whatever it is, it's only helping you go faster in the long term, in the big picture, because it's helping prevent you from having dehydration symptoms, poor performance, health issues, and recover better to do more. So that's a really big one too. I also tend to see just like poor fluid intake during like the work day, or if you're a parent, like during your parenting day, which is a work day without pay. Let's be honest. I tend to see that as like a habit too, like a tendency in people. Like they drink some water maybe in the morning, but then they're like, I feel like I have to make up for it at the end of the day because I'm so like behind. And then I pee all night and then my sleep is interrupted. So this is a really big tendency too. I didn't talk about like daily fluid needs because it's so variable, but I tend to recommend an 80 ounce per day minimum for most of my clients. Again, just because their losses during exercise are pretty great. And for most of them, at least part of the year, there's some temperate conditions or hot conditions, or they're working out in a heated home in the winter, that's 72 degrees, that type of thing. If you are breastfeeding or pregnant, your electrolyte and fluid needs are even higher than this, especially if you're an athlete. So I talk about that more in different podcast episodes, and in my pregnant athlete nutrition course. But 80 ounces, what I tend to recommend as a minimum for most active people who listen to this podcast. And I tend to find for a lot of my clients, not all, but myself too, that if you have like a big vessel, like this 40 ounce Stanley next to me with a straw, if you tend to have a big vessel that you don't have to refill as often, the water intake tends to be a little bit easier. And if you are constantly having to refill a small glass of water, it's harder to make ends meet at the end of the day. So my advice is to try and top load your day. If you can, get a big container of water. It could be a 32 ounce mason jar. It could be your favorite, pint glass. It could be a water bottle, a Stanley, a Hydro Flask, a Yeti, whatever camp you're in. By the way, Michael's, huge hidden gem. Go there. They have like 40 ounce like knockoff Stanleys with really pretty prints, and they're usually like under $20. Just saying. I have a pineapple one that I'm obsessed with. And it doesn't get as moldy either. So anyway, get yourself a big one, fill it up first thing in the morning, or do what I do, and I quote unquote meal prep my water. My husband makes fun of me, but it works, so I do it. I fill my water up at the end of the day. I bring it upstairs before I go to bed. I keep it by like my sink in the morning because that's where I go first thing in the morning. And I start drinking it right away. And I try to finish it before lunchtime or even like before my run in the morning if I can, because I tend to run mid-morning, at least these days. So then I just have to worry about refilling it one or two more times and then, drinking that throughout the rest of the day. So you can get water in fluids in general in a lot of different ways. You could get it in a smoothie. There's going to be some in like protein shakes, or, if you have cereal or fruit, like you're getting a little bit of hydration in. But again, that is a tendency that I tend to see in practice. Um, so we've kind of like grazed the surface of hydration. Just to wrap up here, typically at least 80 ounces of fluid per day is needed for a lot of athletes. Typically at least 3,000 milligrams of sodium is needed per day in athletes. And again, that's coming from someone who used to give low sodium diet educations to heart failure patients every single day in the hospital when I worked there. So I know how hard it can be to wrap your head around that sometimes. But that's something maybe tracking can be helpful for like a day or two to see your habitual intake, and then bump it up from there by salting your food. About a quarter teaspoon of salt has like 600 milligrams of sodium in it. Super cheap and easy. Or get yourself an electrolyte supplement to use. And then during our runs, training, whatever it is, we need about 4 to 40 ounces of fluid per hour, with more likely around like 16 to 32 ounces, or even like 12 to 20 ounces to get more specific, being what I tend to see habitually works best for people in practice. And then at least 300 milligrams of sodium per hour, although what's more average is like 600 to 800 milligrams of sodium per hour. Again, some people can need like upwards of 2,000 milligrams per hour, though. So this can be really individual as well. And you can get that through sports drink, electrolyte supplement, like a salt pill, through salty gels like Huma Plus gels or Crank gels. There's a lot of different ways to make this happen, but you kind of have to assess if it's happening, and then if it's not, how you can break down those barriers to make it happen for yourself. And this is going to help prevent all those symptoms that I listed, with the primary ones I see being like swollen fingers, headache, feeling just bad the rest of the day after a hard workout, and GI issues. GI issues being like a huge one. And it could be diarrhea, it could be constipation, it could be vomiting, sloshiness, or if you're feeling like you're just not tolerating your gels, it probably has more to do with hydration than the gels. So hopefully this was helpful. If you need more help, like implementing this, seeing this in the context of like a general fueling plan with carbs, gels, pre-workout, meals, like all of that kind of laid out. If you need help understanding how to fuel your training, like building meals and snacks, and again, really breaking down some of those mental barriers we have, like fear around consuming sodium, carbohydrates, fear of weight gain by fueling more. And you actually want to start working on that, like actively, not just like absorbing information and not doing anything with it. And you want to be surrounded by like-minded people, which I find helps so much. I invite you to join my Strong Runner Academy group coaching program. The next one, I'm recording this in 2026, starts in July. As soon as you sign up, though, you get access to all of our materials. And this will be my last group program before I go out on maternity leave. So it'll be the last one of this year. Last opportunity to work with me if that is something that you want to do. And spots are limited and it is already filling up. So make sure you check out that program. I've run, I think this will be my 20th group over the course of the past several years. It's helped hundreds of people. And I do find like the being surrounded by like-minded individuals aspect of the group to be incredibly helpful. In addition to all of the information that we cover, all of the information you get access to, the ability to meal plan and create like an actual plan for yourself that we can troubleshoot. You can ask all your questions to me live or in the recordings and emails. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with me during this program. I find it to be really, really effective, which is why I continue to run them. But yeah, make sure you check that out. I'll link how to sign up for that. Check out more info on the group in the show notes, and I will see you in the next one.